This is a hell of a tale. Today, you are going to learn about how a company has fallen to pieces. And it's one the name of which you may not have heard. It's called Thunderful, but hundreds of jobs are gone, and you might recognize at least some of the games, like the entire SteamWorld series. You've probably seen those on Steam, certainly on Game Pass, Planet of Lana Viewfinder, many other games. Basically always indie-scale games with heart. But this is obviously not a story about those games. This is a story about a line that must go up. Now, we say that phrase a lot, sometimes it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but just literally take a look at this line. This is not a line that's been going up, and this line is the stock price for Thunderful Group, and it's not gone up in 5 years. It's actually flatlining right now, and as it flatlines, the business behind it is falling to pieces. Hundreds of layoffs, vaults of intellectual property stuffed away unused. This is an Embracer Group tier disaster that has not yet hit the mainstream. You get to find out about this story today, and just like with Embracer, it is driven by ambition. An ambition to bring together indie teams and punch above their weight and make the line go up in the process. It did not work, so let's investigate. We've also got to face a sad truth. If you have slacked on canceling your subscriptions, come to the front of the class, because we're going to solve that with Rocket Money. They're today's sponsor, and they make solving that problem so easy. And you can even get started for free today at rocketmoney.com/Bellular News. Okay, let's talk subs. Basically, Rocket Money will securely and safely identify recurring charges for you. And then all you do is you just cancel them in a few taps on their UI. They've put in the work to make it smooth and easy. So if it's a chore you've been putting off, well, now's the time, and they'll make it easy. They also do a lot more. As an example, helping you with bill negotiation. Simply upload your bill and they'll be able to help. And for a cracked example, right? My internet recently went to its off-contract price. I had to deal with that, and I negotiated a speed upgrade, and I also halved my monthly bill. That's the kind of thing you can do, and they can help you do it. But returning to the subscription front, they've actually canceled over $500 million of subscriptions. They've helped save their customers up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Rocket Money has other great tools to help you budget, so if you want to spend less and save more, you can join the over 5 million Rocket Money members today using rocketmoney.com/Bellular News, or just clicking my link down below. You can start for free and unlock more features with premium. And to remind you, that's rocketmoney.com/Bellular News. We've chosen Thunderful's most recent victim as the entry point to today's video because it really is just a good encapsulation of everything. So this game is called Rainbreaker, right? It's a narrative roguelite action game, and you can probably see some Hades inspirations. It's from an award-winning studio called Fizbin. It released March 18th, and just 2 weeks before that, the studio announced its closure. They're far from the first victim of Thunderful, and I say victim because they were closed by Thunderful. It wasn't just a publishing agreement. Thunderful had, in fact, acquired the studio. Now, on paper, this should have been a perfect pairing, right? Thunderful had published one of Fizbin's games before, and of course Thunderful, because they're a wider group, they would have the resources to provide Fizbin with security in a fluctuating market, so that short-term cash flow doesn't mean they go to zero. That's the type of thing where an acquisition is supposed to be a value add. And sure, when you're acquired, you cede some control, but game finances are screwed. You can see why you would sell your company to keep the lights on, to get the resources you need. But plans change. Thunderful certainly did. Barely a year after purchasing Fizbin, Thunderful decided that they just didn't want to make games internally anymore. Fizbin's devs were not needed, and Thunderful would not fund another project. It's not like they went away purely because of what they cost or anything like that. No, it was a strategic move made by the people who acquired them, and because of that, rip Fizbin, the line had to go up. The line exists because, well, that's their public stock price. Of course, that means that they needed to list their stock publicly, and Thunderful listed themselves on the First North Premier Exchange in December 2020. The stock sale raised 1.3 billion Swedish kroner, which is about $155 million. That was exactly what they forecasted for their IPO, which means initial public offer. And that was all going to plan. Amazing! 155 mil. And of course, it was late 2020. That's when games looked to be an exceptional investment. Lockdowns had people stuck indoors. Hell, the lockdown effect had World of Warcraft's worst expansion also be its fastest selling one. And as a lot of people who bought into pandemic hype stocks kind of would find out, a lot of that ended up being a bubble. But of course, at the time, what was happening is investors were betting on a fundamental societal change that would have people at home playing games, that they would habituate to that over lockdown periods, and then keep on doing it with game spending rising and rising and rising. So everyone was piling into pandemic stocks, and our industry benefited in the short term, but certainly not in the medium or long term. Thunderful then ended up with a whole bunch of money raised via this stock offering. And that's because investors would look at Thunderful and see a consistent group of developers with a strong plan. But of course, you know what they say about plans coming into contact with the enemy. So, just before the IPO, the CEO of the group spoke to the press. His words have not aged well. Not at all. I'll quote him. "I think our employees are worried that they're going to screw up, but I think we've been very gentle about this, trying to explain to everyone that it's not a dangerous thing. We're ready for this now, and we're prepared for what it entails in terms of responsibility." If this was a TV show, you would say the writers are way too on the nose. That's literally what he said. So now we get to talk about what he did and how wrong he was about everything he said. Everything. It's now time to burn that $155 million. So what happened next was pretty much what always happens after an IPO. Thunderful started expanding, and they did it rapidly. Their first purchase was a developer and a publisher called Head Up Games. They're the people, by the way, who did Bridge Constructor. Well, this is kind of fun. They cost 11 million euros at the time. Remember that figure because it's actually one of the worst deals that Thunderful would make. Over the next 2 years, they bought 4 more studios, including Fizzbin, but oh no, games were not enough. Absolutely not. Thunderful wanted to be self-sufficient, and that meant more than just video games. So they did the obvious. They paid 115 grand for a film production company, which is obviously not a lot of money. 115 grand versus 155 million raised, but man, I think it was still putting the cart before the horse. Granted, it's easy for me to say that in hindsight. Anyway, even if you do have game studios and a production company, you're still going to have a problem. Those studios can only make video games so fast. Not fast enough to make the line go up. And that is why they acquired UK consultancy group Robot Teddy, and they set up 2 grassroots indie game funds. But that still wasn't enough. No game empire is complete without loads of mobile games. So what they did is they acquired a mobile studio and they signed Super Meat Boy Forever. Certainly another banger move in a chain of executing pure business. You know, cross-functional teams, synergy, pursuing blue sky opportunities. I mean, if that does not put Coke in the table, I don't know what will. But speaking of lines, well, the line would go down. Not to shock you, but the whole sugar rush of our last segment was not really healthy for them in the long run. Rather shockingly, all was not well in the C-suite of Thunderful. For the whole of 2021, Thunderful actually made the line go up. Well done, lads. Relatively solid profit growth and good revenue increases. And that really validated that the IPO and the spending were very sensible things. Then 2022 hit. Games like The Gunk simply did not meet their sales targets. By August 2022, the CEO had stepped down and they actually reported a $2 million loss for the year's first half. And when they did, they blamed weaker than expected game performances. But in reality, right, the biggest factor was a quirk of how Thunderful was formed in 2019. So get a load of this. It's a bit spicy, it's a bit weird. The SteamWorld developers at Image and Form and the indie team at Zoink were each 25% of the original Thunderful group. The remaining 50%, well, that was their joint shareholder, Bergsala. Now, Bergsala were not a game developer. They were a publisher, but they weren't just any publisher. They were also Nintendo's official Nordic distributor, and that would matter. It meant that Thunderful's financial performance was only partially tied to their internal developments or even games that they published. If they had a first-party Nintendo game to distribute, they would almost certainly generate a big old pile of cash. But if the distribution side of the business underperformed, while, say, games succeeded, an underperformance could offset the games. They would not necessarily balance out. And if both underperformed, bad news. existentially bad news. By autumn 2023, they had a new CEO who hailed from Ubisoft Massive, and he acted quickly. Management was shuffled, external talent was acquired, but results were not acquired. We all know what that would mean. Perhaps especially when you've got a new CEO, right? New! Not emotionally tied to the rank and file workers, not emotionally tied to the stupid decisions that past leaders made. So it's no surprise they laid off 20% of their headcount in January 2024. That was 75 people. It was a gambit to cut costs by $9 million. But it was not enough. Oh no, cash flows were still negative, targets were missed, and that led to sales. As an example, the entire Bergsala distribution arm that I just talked about was sold from the group to its leadership. Which, by the way, stuff like that can definitely be sus when it can be sus, but that's a different story. And of course, the story that they projected was that Thunderful was now a pure play games company. That was a quote, a pure play games company. One that was obviously fucked, so more sales would follow, and they were brutal. Stage Clear was shut, Jump Ship was sold back to its founder, and Head Up was sold back to its management for €500,000. Remember earlier in this video I said to remember a certain €11 million number? Yeah, they acquired that for 11 million and they sold it for 500,000. Not a good return. And to top off what was an absolutely horrible year, another 100 people got the axe November 2024 in an attempt to save 8 million. After all that, we have to ask, what is the value in Thunderful anymore? Why does it exist? Thunderful's most persistent success was the SteamWorld series. Now, though, almost no one who created those games works there, and according to Thunderful, most of the development staff are, gone, because they're moving away from internal development. Now, remember when the CEO said the staff were worried that the staff, would screw up the IPO? How do his words ring now? Because the staff are obviously not to blame here. They signed up to make games. Leadership across the company is who wanted a powerhouse of games production with investment, development, publishing, distribution, film and television, transmedia, narrative, everything. That's what leadership wanted, not the staff. They had this heady, insane promise that just so happened to coincide with a market that was way too hot, and the company was just flooded with public cash. People wanted to believe, not just because it's a good story, but because believing would mean you'll make a hell of a lot of money. But we can see that leadership were wrong. The CEO, when he said all of those things to the press, was wrong. They were not ready for this, despite their promises. They actually could not do better, and they fell apart the second their ambition was tested. But here's the thing. This is a story that we have seen before. I don't know, I guess. Is this channel just going to devolve into eternal recurrence? Who knows? But here's the point. Leadership gets a taste of expansion and then they lose their minds. On this very channel, we have covered that with Phoenix Labs, with Warner Brothers, even with BioWare. Do they grow too fast and outside of their corporate skill sets? Now look, I am not anti-ambition. I'm pro-ambition. It needs to be matched with responsibility all the way up and down and everywhere in the chain. And it seems to be never the C-suite who ends up paying, and Thunderful is a perfect example. Leadership will take their freshly pruned company, now they've got rid of all those pesky game developers, and it'll go in its new direction, collecting paychecks from things that they have published in the past. Because, yeah, all those revenues are still coming into the company. Now they've cut all those costs, they can just collect the revenues. Maybe they'll have IP to license, they'll have the odd game to publish. Of course, this is at the cost of us not getting new video games, of staff losing jobs, and broadly speaking, the industry falling apart. Thunderful's fall serves as a rapid and transparent example of exactly what has happened all across the industry. And if you want to crank the scale up a few orders of magnitude and learn how WB Games pulled off its worst decade ever, watch this video next.